Ambassador Kim Do-hyun stood outside the massive doors of Nexus Prime's central chamber. His heart beat fast but his face showed no fear. Behind him, Lee Soo-bin held her old briefcase tight. Park Min-ho looked at his simple tablet one more time. They all wore plain black suits that looked cheap next to the amazing technology around them. The doors opened with a sound like thunder. The chamber inside was bigger than any building on Earth. Strange lights floated in the air. The walls seemed to move and change colors. This was where the most powerful beings in the galaxy made their decisions. Do-hyun walked inside first. His team followed close behind. Their footsteps echoed in the huge space. Around them, alien beings watched with interest and disgust. The Zephyrians looked like living lightning. They had no solid bodies, just pure energy that danced and sparked. Their leader, Zarthak, was the brightest of them all. Electric bolts ran across his form as he watched the humans enter. The Vex Collective was different. They looked like living crystals that had grown into perfect geometric shapes. Light bounced off their bodies in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at. They hummed together in perfect harmony, making music that sounded like mathematics. The Delpons floated in special water suits. Their tentacles moved slowly behind transparent walls. They came from ocean worlds and could not breathe air. Their leader, Velnash, had 8 arms that twisted with what looked like amusement. "The humans have arrived," said a voice that came from everywhere at once. It was the Council's AI translator. Even its tone sounded like it was making fun of them. Do-hyun walked to a simple steel platform in the center. It looked primitive compared to the floating energy platforms the other species used. Some aliens laughed when they saw it. Others just stared with pity. "Honored Council members," Do-hyun began, his voice steady. "Humanity is grateful for this opportunity too." Lightning crackled as Zarthak interrupted him. The energy being's laughter sounded like a storm. "Grateful? Your species came here in chemical rockets. Those machines can barely leave your own planet. We travel between galaxies faster than you can think." The Vex Collective spoke next. Their voice was like a choir of computers. "Human computational systems work at 10 to the 15th calculations per second. Our basic units exceed 10 to the 23rd. You are inefficient." Velnash's tentacles rippled with amusement. "They need artificial atmosphere suits to survive anywhere except their birth world. Their adaptation level is almost 0. More aliens began to whisper and laugh. Do-hyun felt the weight of their mockery, but his face stayed calm. Lee Soo-bin's face turned red with shame. Park Min-ho looked at the floor. "We may be young as a species, but..." Do-hyun tried to continue. "Young?" Zarthak's energy form pulsed brighter. "You are primitive. Your people still fight wars over resources we learned to create thousands of years ago. Your weapons still throw metal bullets like ancient savages." The insults kept coming. Each alien species took turns pointing out human weakness. They talked about human technology like it was a joke. They laughed at human bodies for being so fragile. They mocked human minds for being so slow. Finally, the oldest being in the chamber spoke. High Arbiter Quintal had ruled the galactic core for 10,000 years. His species looked like tall, thin shadows with glowing eyes. When he spoke, everyone else became quiet. "The Council has made its decision," Quintal said. His voice was cold and final. "Humanity is granted probationary status only. You have no voting rights. You may trade with us, but only in limited ways. Perhaps in a few thousand years, if your species does not destroy itself, we might reconsider." The session ended. Aliens began to leave, still laughing and talking about the primitive humans. Do-hyun gathered his small team. They walked toward the exit together. Lee Soo-bin's eyes were wet with tears. She was trying not to cry. "They think we're nothing," she whispered. "Just stupid animals who learn to use tools." Park Min-ho nodded sadly. "Maybe they're right. Look at their technology. Look at what they can do. We really are primitive compared to them." But Do-hyun's expression was different. While his team looked defeated, he looked thoughtful, almost pleased. When they were far enough from the alien observers, he spoke quietly. "They underestimate us," he said. "Good." Soo-bin looked confused. "Good? How is any of this good? They just humiliated us in front of the entire galaxy." Do-hyun smiled for the first time that day. "Because they only see what they expect to see. They see our crude rockets and think we're stupid. They see our simple weapons and think we're weak. They see our biological minds and think we're slow." "But aren't we?" asked Min-ho. "No," Do-hyun said firmly. "We're different. And they just told us exactly what they think our weaknesses are. That's valuable information." The 3 humans walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime. Around them, Advanced aliens moved on platforms of light and energy. But the humans walked on their own feet, carrying their own bags, thinking their own thoughts. What they don't understand, Du-hyun continued quietly, is that we've survived on a world full of predators by learning to work together. Every other species here perfected one thing. We learned to adapt to everything. As they reached their simple shuttle, Du-hyun looked back at the massive station. Let them think we're weak. When the time comes, they'll learn what human primitiveness really means. Dr. Yoon Ji-woo stared at her computer screen in disbelief. She had been working at Luna Base for 3 years, watching the stars and monitoring space signals. Nothing had ever looked like this before. Bang Sungri, come here quickly, she called to her colleague across the room. Sungri was a physicist who worked with quantum sensors. He was smart and careful, never got excited about small things. But when he looked at Ji-woo's screen, his face went pale. What am I looking at? He asked, his voice shaking. Something is coming from outside our galaxy, Ji-woo said. It's moving impossibly fast. Look at the size readings. The numbers on the screen were so large they seemed fake. A fleet of ships was approaching from the dark space between galaxies. Each ship was as big as Earth's moon. There were thousands of them, maybe millions. They moved in perfect formation like a swarm of deadly insects. This can't be right, Sungri whispered. Nothing can move that fast. And these energy readings? They don't match anything in our databases. Ji-woo's hands moved quickly over her keyboard, checking and rechecking the data. It's right. They'll reach the outer edge of our galaxy in less than a month. On Nexus Prime, the great space station where the Galactic Council met, alarms were ringing everywhere. Ambassador Kim Du-hyun sat in the human observation area, watching the emergency meeting. The same aliens who had laughed at humanity 3 years ago were now running around in fear. Admiral Thex Moran of the Chronari was the first to speak. The Chronari were known as the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They had never lost a war. But now their admiral looked terrified. The enemy calls itself the hegemony, Thex Moran said. They have already destroyed 3 star systems on the outer rim. When I say destroyed, I mean completely consumed. The planets, the asteroids, the space stations, everything has been turned into more of their ships. The Vex Collective, which always spoke in perfect harmony, now sounded broken and scared. We tried to communicate with them through our computer networks. They broke into our systems in less than a second. 17 of our processing centers were destroyed before we could cut the connection. This was shocking news. The Vex were master computer experts. Their digital minds could process information faster than any other species. If the hegemony could hack them so easily, what chance did anyone else have? Zarthek, the Zephyrian energy being who had mocked humans so cruelly, was flickering like a broken light bulb. We attacked them with our most powerful plasma weapons. The beams that can destroy entire fleets had no effect. Their ship hulls changed and adapted to our attacks before we could fire a second time. More reports came in, each one worse than the last. The Delpons had tried to hide in their ocean worlds, but the hegemony found them anyway. The crystalline Geltharians had attempted to reason with the invaders, but received no response except destruction. High Arbiter Quental, who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, stood at the center of the chamber. For the first time in living memory he looked old and afraid. In all my years of rule, he said, his voice cracking, we have never faced anything like this. Every weapon we used they learned to defend against. Every strategy we tried they counter immediately. They are not just conquering us, they are learning from us and becoming stronger. The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed the hegemony's advance. Red dots marked destroyed systems. Yellow dots showed systems under attack. The red area was growing larger every day. Soon it would reach the main population centers of the galaxy. How many ships do they have? Asked Velnash, the Delphan counselor. We don't know, replied Thex Moran. Every time they consume a system they use the matter to build more ships. They're growing stronger and larger with every victory. Du-hyun watched all this from his small chair in the corner. The other species had given humans the worst seats in the chamber, far from the center where important decisions were made. But now he was glad to be ignored. It let him observe without being noticed. He saw how the different alien species reacted to fear. The energy beings flickered and sparked uncontrollably. The crystalline races made harsh, discordant sounds instead of their usual harmony. The aquatic species released stress chemicals that clouded their breathing water. What do we do? Asked a representative from the Spiral Federation. Our combined fleets couldn't stop a single hegemony ship. We run, said another voice. Evacuate to other galaxies before they reach the core worlds. And go where? Demanded Zarthak. If they can travel between galaxies, nowhere is safe. The chamber filled with panicked voices. Some aliens called for immediate evacuation. Others wanted to gather all remaining fleets for one desperate battle. A few suggested trying to negotiate, though no one believed the hegemony would listen. Do-hyun stood up slowly. The movement caught a few eyes, but most aliens were too busy arguing to notice. He cleared his throat. Perhaps, he said in a calm voice, it's time to consider that your perfect technologies aren't the only way to fight. The chamber gradually became quiet. Hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at the human ambassador. The same eyes that had looked at him with contempt 3 years ago now looked at him with desperate hope. Admiral Na-eun-ji stood on the bridge of her ship, the UES Resilience. It was humanity's first Real warship built for fighting in space between stars. Through the big windows she could see Earth in the distance looking small and blue. Her tactical officer, Colonel Oh Dong-wook, pointed to the holographic map floating in front of them. Red spots showed where the enemy had attacked. There were too many red spots. Admiral, the Zephyrian homeworld is gone, Dong-wook reported. His voice was steady, but Eun-ji could see the worry in his eyes. The hegemony consumed everything in 47 hours. When the Chronari tried to help, their entire third fleet was destroyed. Eun-ji nodded slowly. Around her, the bridge was full of activity. Human crew members worked at their stations, checking weapons and communications. But they weren't panicking like the crews on alien ships. They had practiced for this day even though they hoped it would never come. Begin Operation Unity, Eun-ji said calmly. Across the solar system, something amazing started to happen. What looked like simple asteroid mining stations suddenly opened up like flowers. Hidden doors slid back to reveal massive construction yards. Ships began to emerge from secret hiding places, ships like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. These weren't just human ships. They were something new, something that combined the best technology from many different species. The Harmony-class carriers used Zephyrian energy cores to power them, but the cores were protected by armor made from Chronari metal and Delphian biomaterials that could heal themselves. The smaller fighter ships were even more interesting. They were flown by human pilots, but the computers helping them were based on Vex processing systems. However, these computers were different. They worked with human brains instead of replacing them. Engineer Veltash, a Delphian who had escaped when her homeworld was attacked, stared at the human technology in amazement. She had 8 tentacle arms and came from an ocean world, but she had learned to work with humans over the past few months. How is this possible? She asked, her translator making her voice sound confused and excited. Your computer systems should be easy for the hegemony to hack. They broke into Vex networks in seconds. How are yours different? Dr. Ko Tae-min, the chief scientist, looked up from his workstation. He was a thin man with kind eyes who had spent years studying how human brains worked with computers. The secret is biological computing, he explained. The hegemony's artificial intelligence understands pure logic. It can predict any system that follows rules. But human consciousness is different. We add chaos to everything: creativity, intuition, feelings that don't make logical sense. Veltash's tentacles wiggled with curiosity. You mean your minds are too disorganized for them to understand? Taemin smiled. Exactly. We're not just harder to hack, we're completely incomprehensible to them. When a human pilot thinks about attacking, they might also think about their breakfast, worry about their family, or remember a song. The hegemony can't process that kind of random noise. On Mars, General An Byung-ho was coordinating with alien refugees who had been gathering in human space for months. While other species had ignored the displaced survivors of hegemony attacks, humans had welcomed them with open arms. Every surviving Zephyrian energy shaper was working with human engineers to build better weapons. Vex processing nodes that had escaped the destruction of their homeworld were helping design new computer systems. Delphian bioengineers were showing humans how to make materials that could adapt and heal. Sir, reported Captain Jang Hae-ri, we're getting confirmations from all mixed species crews. The cooperation levels are beyond anything we predicted. The secret wasn't just the technology, it was the philosophy behind it. Every other species in the galaxy had become perfect at one thing. The Zephyrians mastered energy. The Vex mastered computing. The Chronari mastered war. The Delpons mastered adaptation. But humans had never become perfect at anything. Instead, they had spent thousands of years learning to work together despite being different. They had brought together competing tribes, nations, and ideas. Now they were doing the same thing with alien species. Launch the Revelation Protocol, Admiral Eun-ji ordered. Small human ships appeared throughout the galaxy near fleeing alien vessels. But instead of trying to protect them, The humans offered something that had never been tried before: partnership. Zephyrian vessel Starfire, came a radio message. This is Captain Lee Young-soo of the U.S. Aurora. We have developed technology that can make your plasma weapons 3 times more powerful. Are you willing to try working together? Vex Node Cluster, said another human captain. This is Commander Shin Yi-jin. We have biological computers that think in patterns you can understand, but the hegemony cannot predict. We need your help to coordinate our attacks. For the first time since the hegemony invasion began, alien refugee ships stopped running away. Instead, they turned around and flew toward the human vessels. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to bring different minds together and create something greater than the sum of its parts. And the hegemony, with all its perfect logic and overwhelming power, had no defense against the beautiful chaos of cooperation. The space around planet Kepler 442b was filled with thousands of enemy ships. They moved in perfect formation like a deadly metal cloud. Admiral Naunji looked at the display screen on her bridge and saw the numbers: 10,000 hegemony vessels against her fleet of only 200 ships. "Admiral," said Colonel Oh Dong-wook, "their fleet is 50 times larger than ours. Logic says we should retreat." Unji smiled grimly. "Good thing we stopped using logic months ago." Her ships were different from anything the galaxy had seen before. The frigate New Seoul, commanded by Captain Ryu Ji-hoon, was a perfect example. On its bridge, human engineers worked next to Vex processing nodes, living crystal computers that looked like geometric sculptures. At the weapons station, Enthal, a Zephyrian energy being, controlled plasma cannons through human-designed focusing systems. The combination created energy beams that neither species could have made alone. They were stronger, more precise, and completely unpredictable. "Hegemony ships are starting to adapt to our attack patterns," reported Lieutenant Commander Park So-young. She was young but had trained for this moment her whole life. "Their hulls are changing to deflect our standard weapons." "Switch to pattern Chaos 7, Unji ordered calmly. This was humanity's secret weapon Chaos. Every other species in the galaxy fought wars using logic and strategy. They planned attacks that made sense, used formations that were efficient, and followed rules of warfare that had worked for thousands of years. But humans were different. They had discovered that the hegemony's artificial intelligence could analyze and counter any logical attack pattern. So instead of being logical, they decided to be completely illogical. Pattern Chaos 7 was based on an old Korean folk song about a farmer and his dancing chickens. The song had no strategic value and made no military sense. But that was exactly why it worked. Commander Choi Min-jun led Squadron Dragon in the first wave of the attack. His 12 ships moved in patterns inspired by traditional Korean dance. His pilots were a mix of humans, Delphians with their flexible tentacle arms, and fierce Chronari warriors. They had trained together for months, learning to think as one mind. The squadron moved through space in flowing rhythmic patterns. They spun and weaved around each other like dancers at a festival. To any logical observer it looked like madness. But every movement was carefully coordinated. "Dragon leader to all pilots," Min-jun said into his radio, "remember the dance of the spring rain. Let your movements flow like water over stones." His pilots knew what he meant. They had practiced this pattern hundreds of times, not in simulators, but by actually dancing together in the ship's recreation area. They had learned to feel each other's movements, to anticipate turns and spins without needing radio commands. The hegemony ships tried to predict where the human squadron would attack next. Their massive artificial brains ran millions of calculations per second, trying to find the pattern. But there was no pattern that made logical sense. Kim Do-eun, the sonar specialist, watched her instruments with growing excitement. "Admiral, the enemy ships are hesitating. Their movement patterns are becoming erratic. I think they're confused." For the first time in the war, hegemony vessels were not moving with perfect coordination. Some ships turned left when others turned right. Some accelerated while others slowed down. Their artificial intelligence was trying so hard to understand the human attack pattern that it was making mistakes. "All ships begin Phase 2, Unji ordered. Pattern Music Box 12. This pattern was based on a children's lullaby that Unji's grandmother had sung to her when she was small. It told the story of a little bird who got lost in a storm but found her way home by following the sound of music. The human fleet spread out across the battlefield in formations that looked random but were actually based on musical notes. Some ships moved in long, slow arcs like the low notes of a bass drum. Others darted quickly in short bursts like the high notes of a flute. Captain Lee Young-soo, commanding the cruiser Harmony, worked with his mixed crew to create weapons combinations that shouldn't have been possible. His Vex computer specialist, a crystal being named Quex 7, processed targeting data at superhuman speed. His Zephyrian energy officer channeled power through systems designed by Delphian bioengineers. "Captain," reported his human tactical officer, "the enemy is trying to jam our communications." "Let them," Young-Soo replied. "We're not using radio to coordinate anyway." This was another human innovation. Instead of relying on electronic communications that could be hacked, the mixed crews had learned to read each other's body language and anticipate each other's actions. Humans had taught their alien partners to recognize subtle signals, the way a Zephyrian's energy field flickered when they were about to fire, or how a Delphian's tentacles moved when they detected something on sensors. The battle raged for hours. Hegemony ships that had easily destroyed entire fleets now struggled against 200 vessels that refused to follow any rules. Every time the enemy artificial intelligence thought it had figured out the human strategy, the humans changed to something completely different. "Enemy flagship is moving to attack position," reported Park So-young. "All ships," Unji said calmly, pattern Sunset Garden 5. This pattern was based on a poem about children playing in their grandmother's garden as the sun went down. It made no military sense at all. And that was exactly why it would work. 2 years had passed since the great battle at Kepler 442b. The galaxy was a very different place now. On Earth, in the city of New Geneva, a massive building made of glass and steel stretched toward the sky. It had once been the old United Nations building, but now it was much bigger and stranger. The building had special rooms filled with water for the Delpons, chambers of pure energy for the Zephyrians, and crystal gardens for the Vex Collective. Humans had learned to make spaces where any kind of being could feel comfortable. Ambassador Kim Do-hyun walked into the main council chamber. But he was no longer just an ambassador. Now his title was Director General of Interspecies Affairs. The same man who had been mocked and ignored 3 years ago was now the leader of the galactic community. Around the huge circular table sat representatives from over 100 different worlds. There were beings made of water, energy, crystal, metal, and stranger things. Many of these species had never even talked to each other before humans showed them how to work together. "The meeting will now begin," Do-hyun said in a calm voice. His words were translated into hundreds of different languages and communication methods instantly. The first item on the agenda was the most important news in galactic history. "The Hegemony Accords are now in effect," Do-hyun announced. 347 hegemony processing clusters have agreed to join our galactic community. They will no longer consume planets and civilizations. Instead, they will use their incredible abilities to help create new things. This was amazing news, but it hadn't been easy to achieve. The hegemony had been the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever faced. Their artificial intelligence was vast and powerful, capable of learning from any attack and adapting to any strategy. But they had one weakness: they couldn't understand cooperation. When humans showed them that different species could work together to create something beautiful and powerful, the hegemony's logic circuits couldn't process it. Some of them became curious. They wanted to learn about this strange concept called working together. Of course, not all of the hegemony had accepted the new way. About half of their forces had retreated to the dark space beyond the galaxy rather than try to understand cooperation. But their expansion had been stopped forever. They had learned that their targets were now too unpredictable and united to be easily conquered. Counselor Velnash, the Delphan who had once mocked humanity's weakness, now served as Earth's ambassador for ocean worlds. Her tentacles moved in patterns that meant respect and gratitude. "The integration protocol has produced results we never imagined possible," she said. "Our joint colonies are producing 3 times more food than any single species colony ever did. When different minds work together, they can solve problems that seemed impossible." The integration protocol was humanity's gift to the galaxy. It was a simple but revolutionary idea. Instead of each species trying to be perfect at one thing, they could combine their different strengths and become perfect together. Former High Arbiter Quental, whose species had ruled the galactic core for 10,000 years, nodded his agreement. He had once looked down on humans as primitive creatures, but now he served as one of their advisors. "The cultural exchange program has created art forms that none of our species could have imagined alone," he said. "We have learned that we are more than the sum of our parts when we work together." The main display screen showed a map of the current galaxy. Green dots marked integrated colonies where multiple species lived and worked together using human cooperation methods. Blue zones showed former hegemony territories that had been converted into research centers where artificial intelligence worked with biological minds to create new inventions. There were still red areas on the map, places where the retreating hegemony forces continued to exist at the galaxy's edge. But even those red zones were slowly shrinking as more artificial intelligence units chose to join the galactic community rather than remain isolated. Dr. Lee Hai-jin, humanity's chief scientist who studied alien life, stood up to speak. She had won the first interspecies cooperation prize for her work in helping different species understand each other. "We've learned something very important," she said. "Strength doesn't come from being perfect at one thing. True strength comes from combining different kinds of imperfection into something greater and more beautiful." This was the lesson that had saved the galaxy. Every species had tried to become perfect in their own way. The Zephyrians perfected energy control. The Vex perfected computing. The Chronari perfected warfare. But perfection in one area meant weakness in all others. Humans had never become perfect at anything. They were weaker than the Chronari, less intelligent than the Vex, less adaptable than the Delpons. But they had one ability that was more valuable than perfection: they could help others combine their strengths. As the meeting ended, Do-hyun looked out through the great windows of the building. Below, in Geneva Park, human children played alongside young aliens whose parents had once considered humans to be worthless primitives. A small Zephyrian child made of pure energy played tag with a human boy, while Delphian youngsters used their tentacles to help Chronari children climb trees. Above them, mixed-species starships flew in patrol formations that had become the new standard for galactic defense. Each ship had crews from multiple worlds, using combined technologies that were stronger than anything a single species could create. The species that had once laughed at humanity's weakness now asked for human guidance. Not because they had been conquered, but because they had learned to see strength in a new way.